Welcome everyone to the Gaming Police, a channel dedicated to video and board game reviews. Today's episode will feature one of my favorite cooperative board games, Forbidden Island, developed by Gamewright. This game is suited for 2 to 4 players ages 10 and up, and the average gameplay time is around 30 minutes. That's 30 heart-pounding, adrenaline-filled minutes. What's the objective, you ask? Your team of adventurers must work together to keep Forbidden Island from sinking in order to buy enough time to capture its 4 treasures. Once you've captured them, you must make it to Fool's Landing and escape by helicopter to win. If, however, the island sinks before you can complete your tasks, the mission ends in defeat. You heard it right, folks. Grab your satchels and Indiana Jones fedora. It's time to travel to the Forbidden Island. Okay, the first thing we do to set up this game is we have to actually create Forbidden Island. And the island itself is represented by these 24 island tiles, which you randomly shuffle and then place them onto the board. And the way you do that is you make a 4x4 square grid, and then you do 2 additional island cards on each side. So as you can see, the possibilities are endless. No 2 games are ever going to be the same just because of the random factor of how the island is set up. And you can tell that each of the tiles represents a certain part of the island. And there's a reason why we left a small gap between it, and we'll get into that. So once we've done that, we want to place our 4 treasures on the side of the island. It doesn't really matter where. It's not relevant at this point. The 4 treasures are represented by the Earth Stone, the Statue of the Wind, if you guys can see that. You have the Crystal of Fire, and finally the Ocean's Chalice. Now each of the treasures is directly tied to a certain place on the island. So each of those 4 treasures can only be collected from 4 areas of the island. I'm sorry, 2 areas of the island. So for example, if we were trying to collect this treasure right here, the only corresponding tiles that we could go to are Howling Garden. And if you take a look, the bottom left portion of that actually has a symbol of the Statue of the Wind. So we could collect it from that tile, for example, or we could get it from the Whispering Garden. And again, each of the other treasures, they have 2 corresponding tiles where we can collect them from. The next thing we did is we shuffled and divided our different decks, which is the Flood deck, represented by the blue cards. We also have a treasure deck over here, and we have a deck that represents the different adventurers. Each adventurer has different abilities, for example. So the next part of this setup initially is, again, we're telling a story here, so the island itself at this point starts to sink. So what we're going to do is, with this shuffled flood deck, we're going to basically draw the top 6 cards one at a time, place them face up in a flooded draw pile, if you will, and we're going to flood the corresponding areas of the island. So for example, as you can see, the first card I pulled is the Cave of Shadows. So I'm going to go ahead and find the Cave of Shadows, which is down here. And if you can see, that's actually very important because that represents one of our treasure cards. So it's not good for us to lose that right off the bat. So we're just going to flip it over to the white and blue side, and that just represents that particular tile being flooded. And we will do this with 5 more cards. So next we have the Iron Gate. We're going to find the Iron Gate on our board, which is right over here. And we're going to flip it over to demonstrate that that tile is flooded. Okay, we have Breaker's Bridge. We're going to find that one here as well. It's on the corner. We also have Whispering Garden, which we just showed, so we know that that's one of our treasure cards. So we're going to go ahead and flood that. We have the Misty Marsh. And finally, the Dunes of Deception. Okay, so that's how we're going to start the game. Again, we have 6 tiles that are flooded to begin with. The next thing we're going to do is a part of the game that's called the Adventurers Appear. So now that this island has begun to sink, we have our adventurers that are going to show up. Now we randomly shuffled the adventure cards. There's 6 of them. It is a 4-player game. Well, 2 to 4. You can have a maximum of 4 players. So at any given point, you could end up with one of 6 different abilities, if you will. So if we randomly shuffle them and hand them out, and the first person is going to be the pilot, as you can see right over here. Their special ability, as you can see on the bottom, is once per turn, they can fly on any tile on the island for 1 action. So the pilot is represented by a blue card. He'll have a blue player icon, and there's also a corresponding tile where each player starts. So if you see on this Fool's Landing tile on the bottom right corner, there's a blue little man symbol. That's where he's going to start. Next, we have the Explorer. So somebody drew the Explorer card. Their ability will be to move or shore up diagonally. We'll get into that in a little bit. So that's represented by the green icon, and they start over here. We have the Messenger card, which the Messenger can give treasure cards to a player anywhere in the island for 1 action per card. We'll also get into that a little bit later. So the Messenger actually starts in a flooded tile, which is okay. And finally, our 4th player drew the Engineer card, and their ability is to shore up 2 tiles for 1 action. And he will start right over there. Now, after we've set up our starting positions, we're going to hand out treasure deck cards, which are represented by these over here. Now, every player is going to start with 2, and we can show these to each other because it is a cooperative game. So the first player, for example, they're going to get these 2 cards, which is great because you need 4 of a kind to be able to go to that part of the island and collect that treasure. So right off the bat, they started off with 2, and that is very good. The next player, for example, drew these 2 treasure cards. So it's going to be a little bit tougher for them, right? They only have 1 out of the 4 of a kind that they need to collect the treasure. So now they can decide whether to go for the fire emblem or for the lion with the wings. Our 3rd player also gets a treasure card. However, they have another card here that gives a special ability. And if you can see that, it's called the helicopter lift. Basically, they can move 1 or more pawns on the same tile to any other tile, or lift your team off of Fool's Landing. So this card is essential because you actually need it to win the game. They can play this at any time. It does not count as an action. This is a great card to have throughout the game, but you also want to save it for the end so you can actually get off the island. And finally, our 4th player receives these 2 cards. So they get a treasure card they can start with, but they also get what's called a sandbags card. And what this does is it basically allows them to shore up any 1 tile on the island, and they can play this at any time as well. So now that everybody started out with their treasure cards, the only thing left to prepare this game before we start is to set the difficulty, which is represented here by this water rises tiles. And as you can see, the difficulty start out from novice, normal, elite, legendary, And as the game continues, the water levels will rise until eventually, as you can see there represented by the skull, if you don't get your treasures and leave the island on time, your team will lose. So we'll go ahead and set the little marker over here, and we will go ahead and start this game out on normal. And that is it for the initial setup. Next, we'll get into how the game is actually played. Okay, guys, now let's discuss how the game is actually played. So each player is going to take a turn, and play will resume to the left. And during your turn, everybody's going to do the following three things in order. So they will take up to 3 actions. They will draw 2 treasure deck cards right over here. And they will draw flood cards that are equal to the water level, which you can see right now we're at water level 2. Okay, now let's talk about the first action. And actually, before we even get into that, on every player's card, for example, if we show the engineer card here, on the back of every player's card, it actually gives you the order of play. So you kind of have the rules on the back and everything that you need, and it explains what the actions are and how to perform them. So every player has that on the back of their respective cards. Okay, so let's talk about the first action. So the first thing you can do is you can take up to 3 actions during your turn. So it says up to 3, so you could do nothing, you can make 1 move or 2 moves, and basically this is what you can do. So you may do a move, and when you move for 1 or more actions, basically you move your pawn to an adjacent island tile, so either up, down, left, or right. So for example, if we were this guy right here, well, we could go to this tile, or this one, or anywhere around here, and that will count as 1 action, and we can perform up to 3 of those, right? So for example, let's go ahead and take 2 actions and move him over here. 1, 2. So now he's on the same tile with the gray player, and they're both at the iron gate, which is actually a tile that is currently flooded. Okay, so we did 2 actions. Uh, the other action that we can perform is shore up. So we can actually save this tile as part of our gameplay. So we can, for 1 action, bring this tile back so that it's no longer flooded, which is great, because remember, we need to be able to navigate around this island so that we're able to pick up our treasures and then escape from it before the island actually floods. So the other thing that we could have done had we had more actions available or had somebody closer to us is for 1 action we could have given one of our treasure cards. So if these are the cards that the blue player has, for example, we could have given one of these treasure cards to the gray player because we're on the same tile. And finally, when you actually have 4 of a kind and you go to the corresponding tile of that treasure on the island, for 1 action you can obtain that treasure. So those are the actions that you can perform during your move. Again, very basic, very simple, but it gives you a lot of choices and a lot of strategy to consider. So the next thing that we do, once we have completed our actions, is we have to draw 2 treasure deck cards. So you would draw these over here 1 at a time. So this player, the first one they draw is the fire treasure card. And we will put him right here in his pile. And the second one is the chalice card. Okay? And that goes in the pile. Now remember, you can only have up to 5 cards in your hand at any one time. And like we talked about earlier, you need 4 of a kind when it comes to the treasure cards. So really, if you start ending up with some excess cards, you may want to strategize and meet up with players to give them the treasure cards that they're seeking so they can find their respective treasures. Otherwise, you're going to have to discard any excess cards past 5. Moving on from there, the next thing that we have to do is we have to draw flood cards. Now, when we're drawing those, we have to draw a number of cards from the top of the flood deck over here, and it has to be equal to the water meter over here. So our water meter is currently at 2. That means we're drawing 2 of these cards. Now this is basically us playing the part of the island, okay? So this part is never fun. It can always be stressful, and I'll show you why. Okay, well that's not too bad. The first card we pulled out is actually the silver gate. So we're going to find that spot somewhere over here on the board. Let's see, the silver gate. Right over here. So we have to go ahead and flood that. And finally for our second one, Fool's Landing. So that one is actually going to flood for the moment too. And later I'll get into why that card is very important as well. Okay, so that completed our turn. So now we would move on to the next character. So let's assume that I'm playing for the position of the gray character, who is the messenger. Now their ability is to give a treasure card to a player anywhere on the island for one action. So the gray player doesn't even have to be in the same tile as the rest of the adventurers. They can just, for one action, they can give one of their cards to somebody else. So for example, since I know that the blue player who's on the same tile as me is collecting these treasure cards, and I have one of them, it just coincidentally works out that we're in the same tile. I can go ahead and give him my card for one action. And for my second action, I will go ahead and move to the Temple of the Moon. And for my final action, I will shore up Whispering Garden. Remember, you can shore up adjacent cards, right? Top, bottom, left, and right. Now, the gray player, again, we have to draw 2 treasure cards. Okay, so let's draw the first one, and look what we ended up with, guys. We ended up with a Water's Rise card. Now, the reason, let me get that to focus in for you guys. The reason that's not good is because we have to move the water level now. So this is the game's way of increasing the difficulty. So I will set that down in the discard pile right here. So we're going to go ahead and actually be moving from step number 2 to number 3 now. Why is that significant for us? I'll show you in a moment. Now remember, we still have one more card left to draw over here from the treasure deck, and it's just going to be a lion treasure card. So that goes over here in our pile. Okay, so now remember earlier we drew 2 of these cards because it was set at the number 2 difficulty level. Now we've moved up because of the Water's Rise card. So now we have to draw 3 of these. So the first one that we pull up is the Temple of the Sun. So now that one has to flood. Next card is going to be Crimson Forest, which is located right over here. That's going to flood. And then we have the Cave of Embers, right down here. Okay, now the reason this is significant is because the last action on the Water's Rise card is to shuffle all of these. So we're just going to shuffle them up. And then we place them back on top of the flood deck. So why is that important? Is because once we start drawing these again, we know that the same tiles that got flooded are going to come up again. Now, if a flooded tile comes up a second time, we actually lose that piece from the board. So as you can see, the island at this point is not flooded. It actually, parts of the island start to sink, which becomes problematic in terms of movement. So again, that's how play would continue and go on from that point. The object of the game, like we discussed earlier, is for us to collect 4 treasure cards, go to the corresponding tile on the board game, and we can turn in those 4 treasure cards for the corresponding treasure. Now, here's the kicker. This is how you can lose the game. So there's 4 possible ways of losing. If the temples, caves, palaces, and garden tiles sink, then you lose the game. Why? Because those are the tiles that have the treasures on them. So if we were to lose Cave of Shadows down here, as you can see, that's one that has the fire emblem, then that would be okay because we still have another one right here. But if we were to lose that second one and we didn't collect that treasure, now there's no way for us to get that treasure and we would lose the game. Now, if you already have the treasure and those tiles sink, then it's not a big deal. So that's one way to lose. Another way is if we lose the Fool's Landing tile. Why is this one important to keep in the game? Is because when we've collected all 4 treasures, we all have to make it together back to this tile, and one of us needs to have this helicopter lift card to get us off the island with our 4 treasures. So that is a very important tile to keep throughout the game. Another way you can lose is if any player is on an island tile that sinks and there's no adjacent tile to swim to. Okay, so let's demonstrate that. Let's say we have the messenger over here, and we lose this tile, and this one, and this one, and all of a sudden we pull out from the flood deck the tile for the iron gate, and this one sinks. This player has nowhere to go. They can't move anywhere adjacently, so they actually would drown and we would lose the game. Now, had there actually been a tile somewhere adjacent and his card sank, the game automatically has you swim to the nearest tile. So he would be safe right there. So that's the third way you can lose. And finally, if the water level reaches the skull and crossbones. So if we get all the way up there to the top, to the skull and crossbones, then we have lost. Trust me, at that point, you're drawing so many of these, it's hard to keep up. So really, the game, the tension is constantly building up. It really does feel like you're racing against time to get these treasures, to use strategy, work together, and come back to Fool's Landing and hopefully have all 4 treasures and fly off the island. And we will finally do our wrap-up summary. All right, for our final thoughts, I gotta say that this is honestly one of my family's favorite go-to games. It's also a great game to introduce your friends and family to board games. Most people are not even familiar, they don't even know that the concept of a cooperative board game exists. This is a very great example of how you can work together as a team against the board game, and when you come out victorious, you feel that much better for it. There's no sore losers. There's not going to be any Monopoly board games being thrown across tables. I mean, let's face it, those of us who grew up in the 80s and the early 90s, we remember that. We remember those heated board game battles with our families. And there'd always be a couple people that are mad because there would only be one winner. Not with this game. We either all win together or we lose together. And trust me, when you lose, you want to come back and play it again. The other thing that makes this game so great is no 2 playthroughs will ever be the same. The island, every time you set it up, is going to be different. Sometimes you'll swear that the treasures are all right next to Fool's Landing, and it's great because you can collect them really quickly. Other times, they're so far dispersed that you got to come up with some crazy ways of working together and really stretching your resources out to try to collect these treasures and come back together as a team to leave the island. So it's a unique experience every time. Again, it's very simple, easy to pick up. It does say that it's for ages 10 and up. Honestly, there's a lot of smart kids nowadays. You know, when I was young, I mean, I was eating dirt and playing in it. Kids nowadays, at the age of 7 or 8, they know how to work computers and iPhones and everything else. So I have no doubt that they can pick up on this game too. I think, again, final thoughts is it's a great family game. You should definitely give it a shot. And we give it a full 5 stars over here at Gaming Police. And final thing is, if you like this video, please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We're just getting started. There will be plenty more to come. There's going to be some great board games, video game reviews coming up. We'll be doing some playthroughs, and it's going to be a good time over here. So please be sure to subscribe, and we can't wait to see you guys again.